The beginning of October. I don't remember if it was a Friday or the Saturday. It was fairly dark. There was a disco going on at the youth club, and two girls came down the road towards the disco. Something came over me. I got out of my car, unzipped my trousers, and got my penis out. I had a knife in my hand, but that was a mere triviality. The following day, about dinner time, I put an old carpet into my car to take and dump on some spare ground. I stopped my car in one of the side streets near Vavasseur Street. I got out, opened up the boot, and took out the carpet. It was a pretty heavy one. I unzipped myself and my shirt front came out. I put that back in and I put my zip back up. There was an old lady and a fella in the street, and I didn't deliberately expose myself that day. This is terrible. It's those damned injections. All this would never have happened. That thing up the Kingsway Youth Club, and that little girl, Leslie. I don't know what happened. It's all a bit hazy. It's those damned injections. You see, I can't tell myself when I've had my injection. That Sunday didn't sound. That day I killed her. Yes, I killed that little girl. I stabbed Leslie. I went out for a run on my own in the car, and I went through Turf Hill towards Broad Lane. Leslie was on the side of the road near a pub. I stopped. I can't remember what I said to get her into the car, but I drove up there. I'd been to Ripponden once before, soon after I got the car. I went up the motorway and came off there, and I went down into Ripponden, and I sort of got lost. I had to turn round near some bollards, and I finished going back home to Rochdale. I went through Littlebrook to get back, but I didn't take her so far. I talked her into the car, and then something came over me. I go all hazy and queer when I've had my injections. Like I keep telling you, I took her up on the hillside onto the moor, and she struggled a bit. I held her down, and I played with myself onto her. I got the knife out, and I stuck it into her neck. Look, I just went blank. I can't remember anything. I don't know what came over me. I don't remember driving home or leaving up there. I do remember the wiping the knife on the girl, on her clothes, the bone handle one. I want to make a statement. I just want to get it off my chest. I don't know what's come over me. And it's the tablets, the injection. I just want to get it all sorted out. I held it with one hand and I used my left hand to wank with. She was laid facing me and I was on my right side. I shot between her legs and her knickers. I didn't take off her knickers. I had a knife in my pocket and I took it out and I stabbed her in the throat. She was still crying. I got a hazy feeling and I can't remember where or how I stabbed her. She slumped away from me and I don't remember what happened after that. I left her where she was and I didn't bother to look back. I got back into the car and I drove home. I didn't tell my mother what I did. I put the knife back into my pocket and I wiped it onto her clothes or something. I can't remember what. I was a bit hazy then.
I know. It's disgusting. what they had just heard. That beautiful, fragile, tiny little girl, just 11 years of age. Her life brutally ripped from her. None of this was her fault. Nothing that happened was her fault. She was a tiny girl, small for her age, barely 4 foot tall. So small, you could push her over with your little finger. With a heart defect from birth, she couldn't play like other children. She had to sit inside and watch the other children playing outside, playing tag. On a good day, she could run simple errands. But the heart surgery she underwent at the age of 3 made sure she was not like other children. And yet she was happy. Her stepfather, Danny, loved her. Her sisters loved her. She was loved. Oh, she was loved. Her name was Leslie Mulseed. Her family called her Lel. She was a gift. All children are a gift. Every child. She had simple tastes. The taste of a child. She loved her cat, Jinxie. But Jinxie had gone missing a few days before. Did the killer tell her he could help her find Jinxie? Who knows? Her favorite group was the Bay City Rollers. I do not know who they are, but all the girls love Bay City Rollers. She was wearing socks, blue and white hoops with tartan and Bay City Rollers written on them. Perhaps the killer had said something about them to persuade her to talk to him. Poor child. So small. So vulnerable. Life is so cruel. Some children are born suffering. It never leaves them their entire lives. So unkind, so cruel. Her sister was making dinner and realized there was no bread. Leslie was sent to the shop to get a large loaf. It was her brother Fred's turn, but he was out playing football, so Leslie accepted the job. The Spar shop was not far, just around the corner. So she set off with the money and was told she could spend threepence on sweets for herself. She never got home. Where was she? The dinner was served, and yet there was no bread, and no Leslie. Ever again. So dreadful.
The police shouted at me. I didn't understand why. They called me mentally deranged and a sexual deviant. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just at home thinking about Christmas when they called at my house. I love Christmas. I love Christmas trees with their tinsel and baubles and fairy lights. So many fairy lights. I love bright, colourful lights. Under the tree is where we put the presents, all wrapped and ready to be opened. I love Christmas. Did I say I love Christmas? I've always loved Christmas. A chance to be with your family and to share the joy and the happiness with those that you love. And I love getting presents. Every year, my mother wraps up loads of presents for me and puts them under the tree. And I sit in my chair full of excitement as she hands each one to me in turn. I open the wrapping paper carefully to see what she's bought me. And other presents too. From my Auntie Frida. She is my mother's sister. They say that one day I will get married and have a family of my own. And I can sit and watch their faces as I give each present in turn like my mother. They want me to be happy. I live at home with my mother. My father died when I was young. My Auntie Frida brought me up. I don't think I will get married. I don't think girls like me. Would you like me? I didn't think so. People think that I am odd. So some children laugh at me and call me names. They're bad. So naughty. They should be punished. I don't like being around children. They upset me. After they took me away, the police, I just told them I wanted to go home. I was worried because I didn't want my mother to be alone for Christmas. I wanted to go home, to sit in my chair, open the presents that my mother gave me. I thought they would let me once I told them everything they wanted to hear. I told them everything they wanted. I told them exactly as I could remember it. I thought that would be enough. They said that would be enough. I'm not a sexual deviant. I don't understand what that is really. I don't know why they said that. I didn't do anything wrong. I had lied a few times, but they made me. They scared me, and I lied and I got confused. The drugs, the injections, they make me hazy, and I can't remember everything clearly. But I told them what they said they needed, and I just wanted to go home. My mother will be very worried at home on her own. I needed to be with my mother. They really upset her when they came to the house and arrested me. They said, Stefan Ivan Kishkar, I must caution you that you do not have to say anything unless you wish to do so. But anything that you do say will be taken down and may be given in evidence against you. They were serious. They were taking me away. I went peacefully. Why wouldn't I? I didn't know what they really wanted me for, but I knew I was in trouble. So I went.
I was born Charlotte Slavich on a farm in Slovenia in June 1923. I was the second daughter of Leopold and Hedvig Slavich. We lived close to the Austrian border. Because of the Nazis, we fled from Slovenia and I settled in England as a refugee, all alone. I headed to the northwest and worked in a cotton mill in Oldham. And once I was trained, they sent me to Rochdale. My sister, Elfreda, joined me, and I met another immigrant working there, a really strong road worker named Ivan, and we fell in love. Ivan was from Ukraine. We married in 1951 and settled in Rochdale, and we started a family. We both wanted children, and in late 1951, I became pregnant. We welcomed our first child into the world on the 24th of March, 1952. 12 days after his birth, he came back home in Crawford Street. He was a strong, healthy baby and took after his father. But at 6 months, he developed a breathing condition, and it only got worse over the last 5 years. The doctors told us we should move abroad, that it was only going to get worse for your son if you stay where the dust in the air is affecting him. We didn't want to leave, but I took my son to my mother, who had settled in Rehearsal in Austria, to feel the benefit of the clean, fresh air. It provided a welcome relief for my son and for my breathing conditions. But he developed tonsillitis and then an abscess on his buttocks. He never truly seemed well. And so we returned to England, and my son returned to school, although he was a year below those of his own age. I thought that he should look smart on his first day back in school. I sent him in traditional German wear, but he didn't fit in. I suppose there were many reasons why he didn't fit in. His name, Stefan Kiszko, son of Ivan Kiszko, the man who helped lay the M62. But Stefan became famous for very different reasons. Also wrong reasons. But you probably already realize that. Well, let me tell you, what they are saying happened. Never happened. Not like they said it did. I know my Stefan. He was no killer. The very thought is disgusting. I will not hear of it. They said he confessed. But I know my Stefan. He is a gentle soul. He had many health problems. Was often in hospital, even as a grown man, but he could never do what they said he did. You see, he is a kind boy. He is considerate and caring. He loves me and worries about me. Stefan would do anything for me, or his Auntie Frida. He is a good boy. He's perhaps a little odd. But who amongst us is not a little odd or a little misunderstood? He worries about me. He told me that he was afraid I was worrying about him after the police came. Nobody around here seemed to believe that Stefan was innocent. The evil stares of judgment. The harsh words spat at me as I walked by. They saw Stefan as a killer that had robbed this little girl, this poor dear little girl, of her life in most horrific way. But I knew that my boy would never do such things. They were evil. My boy was not evil.
I lied. When they first interviewed me about the things I said I had done, I lied. I thought that if I told them the truth, I would not be allowed to see my mother. So I lied. I know I shouldn't have lied. It's wrong to lie. I know that now. I'm sorry I lied. It's the wrong thing to do, but I was scared. They were telling me all sorts of things, accusing me of all sorts of things. I could see that they hated me for what they thought I had done, and they wanted to prove it. But they couldn't prove it, and so they shouted at me and called me bad names. I wanted to see my mother. She said she came to the police station, but they wouldn't let anyone see me. And it would soon be Christmas. Did I tell you I love Christmas? I knew my mother would be unhappy on her own for Christmas if I wasn't there. To be there with her. To be there for her. So I told a few lies so they would let me go home, thinking nothing was wrong. But they wouldn't let me go home. They kept telling me I was a dirty pervert. They said I was a murderer. They told me I was mentally deranged. I told them I can't remember everything because my memory is hazy and the injections make me forget. I have injections bring me on. You know what I mean? Everyone was worried because I don't like girls. I'm not interested. So the doctors, they arranged for me to have a course of injections to bring me on, to make me interested in sex. Never really been interested in sex. I don't know why. They gave me injections and some girly magazines with naked pictures in to see if it would bring me on. And they worked. A bit. I mean, I don't like talking about it, but they did work. A bit. And I did play with myself. A bit. The doctor said that was good. I was frightened my mother would catch me doing it though, so I left the magazines in the car. I did play with myself, but only in private. I didn't want people to know. You wouldn't want people to know, would you? But the injection, they made me do things I didn't do before. It was the injections. The doctor said I had the emotional maturity of a child. Said I was like a child of 10 or 11. That's why they wanted to bring me on. I don't know if they were right. But they gave me the injections. And when the police told me they found the magazines in my car, they knew I was a dirty bastard and that I was sick in the head. I didn't know what to say. I just wanted to get home to my mother. I need to see that my mother was safe. That she wasn't worrying. I wanted a Christmas at home. I didn't spend Christmas at home for a very long time though. Not for many years. I know I shouldn't have lied. I know that lying is wrong. But the policemen, they lied too. And if it is wrong for me to lie, it is wrong for them to lie too. Maybe even more wrong. And they lied. They told me that if I explained how everything had happened with that little girl, Leslie, that I could be back home in time for Christmas. I love Christmas at home.
Do not trust the police. Stefan had total trust in the police. Stefan believes that the police would catch the bad people responsible for crimes, and that the people who had not been guilty of a crime have nothing to fear from the police. Stefan did not grow up in fear of the secret police spying on him. Stefan did not grow up fearing a knock on the door from the secret police who had come to take you away, never to be seen again. Perhaps if he had grown up like that, like me, he would not have trusted them. He would have not have taken them at their word. After he was arrested, they took him to the police station, and I made my way down there to see him, to explain that Stefan is not a bad boy, and that he was not capable of the things they were accusing him of. But they would not let me see him. They kept him in the cells, away from everyone but the police themselves. He didn't have a lawyer. He didn't know that he could have a lawyer with him. In between shouting at him and telling him all the terrible things they suspected him of, they made him promises. They pretended to be nice after accusing him of being a child sex killer. They pretended to understand and be kind, but they were cruel and spiteful, and they wanted to find him guilty. They had come to the house and searched for evidence, taking away anything they felt might show that Stefan was a crazed killer. They found a handkerchief under his pillow. They found some pocket knives of Stefan's. And they found the dirty magazines that Stefan kept hidden under mats in his car. And they said there were witnesses too. Young children who swore that Stefan had exposed himself to them. And adults who swore that they had seen Stefan. I kept trying to see Stefan, but it was not allowed. My accent. They thought I was stupid because I did not sound English. They know I am a refugee, but they think that all foreigners are scum. They thought I was stupid. But let me assure you before I go, Charlotte Kisgo, formerly Slavage, is no fool. I didn't go to university. I'm not some damn professor. But I know the truth, and I will always fight for the truth. I do not trust the police, and if you had my background, you would not either. You should not underestimate Charlotte Kisgo. I am no little frail widow, son of a killer. I am Charlotte Kisgo, widow of Ivan Kisgo, and mother of Stefan Kisgo. I will not be ignored, and I will not be silent.
I told them I did it, but I didn't do it. I lied. It wasn't true. I made it up. I told them what they wanted to hear. When I made another confession saying I had lied, the police asked if I was saying that. They promised they would let me go home if I told them that they wanted to hear. I said no. I just thought they would let me go. I wanted to see my mum. I told them that so they would let me go home. I didn't know. I didn't understand. They knew that was why I said the first confession, and they just let me believe that I would be able to go home if I said what they wanted to hear.
He is a sweet and trusting boy. You have to understand that. My Stefan does not believe that the police would be deceitful. My Stefan trusts that British justice is honest and true. He believes that if you tell the truth, everything will be okay. But if the police tell you something, that they are telling the truth. Perhaps if Stefan had grown up in the old country, knowing that the police can be responsible for many evil things, if he had seen what they were capable of, then maybe he would have been safer all alone in the police station. He just didn't understand what was happening to him. They wanted my Stefan to be the killer. They wanted a quick solution. And bless him, Stefan gave them the means to charge him with murder.
I watched my father die. I was young. We had gone out for a walk together. He had a massive heart attack. He dropped dead right in front of me. After my father died, I told myself I would never leave Mum all alone. And now she was. All because I lied to the police. It was my own stupid fault. Nothing I said or did could make a difference now. And the only thing that would happen next was they put me on trial.
The trial was inevitable. There was a lot of evidence from witnesses who were ready to tell the court that Stefan had exposed himself. They had experts who said that fibre had been found on Stefan's car matching the fibre on Leslie's clothing. They had found knives at our home that belonged to Stefan. And they found balloons and sweets in Stefan's car that they said to lure children into his clutches.
They were making it up. I told them I could explain everything. I was innocent. didn't do it.
But the most damning thing was your confession.
I told them it wasn't true. I told them I made it all up.
There were facts in Stefan's confession. Facts they did not release to the press or the public. Things that they said that the killer would have known. Stefan could not have made things up, which was so accurate, giving little details of what the killer did and how the little girl was killed. Things like the public would not know.
The lawyers didn't help my case. I told them I wanted to plead not guilty because I didn't do it. They had told the court that I was pleading not guilty because I didn't do it. But then they also said that if I did do it, I'd been suffering from diminished responsibility. I don't know why they said that. That made the jury think that I must have done it if my own lawyers were saying that if I killed her, I was not in my right mind at the time of killing. I think they might have even believed I really did it.
That confession. I asked Stefan why he knew so much about what had happened to the poor little Leslie. He told me that the police had been shouting at him and telling him what happened. They were shouting accusation after accusation at him. You know you did X, and then you did Y, before you did Z. They told Stefan everything that had happened to that little girl as they accused him of this dreadful crime. That is how they know things that the public did not know.
It's true. I remember how they described it to me, what the killer must have done. I remembered it because they kept shouting at me, accusing me of all sorts of horrible things I would never do. I could do any of those things. When they wanted my confession, I thought if I told them exactly what they wanted to hear, they would let me go home. So I repeated the things they had told me.
I cannot blame the jury. They were presented with so much evidence and could only come to one possible solution. Stefan was guilty of murdering a little girl because of his deranged sexual fantasies. They could only see the monster painted by the police. They saw my Stefan in the dock, and they imagined him towering over her, and her in terrible fear. They imagined that the face of my Stefan was the last thing that Leslie Moseed ever saw in her sad, short life. Who would not find a man guilty when such a picture is painted? They made a decision based on circumstantial evidence twisted into a false narrative. We cannot blame them for their decision. They could only use what was presented to them. They did their civic duty.
I didn't understand how people could think I had done such dreadful, terrible things to a child. I could never. It makes me cry to remember them saying I was guilty of murder. I wasn't guilty. I didn't.
I vowed to fight until my very last breath to prove that Stefan Kishko, my son, was not guilty. Stefan was no murderer. What had they done to him? They had marked him as a demented, sex-craved child killer. By finding him guilty, they painted a giant target on his back for all his time in prison. Prisoners hate child sex offenders, and the guards hate them too. So they turn a blind eye to the assaults and abuse. Stefan had so many problems in prison. It broke him. He was never the same again. Eventually, he was placed in isolation for his own protection. His physical and mental health were destroyed by the actions of others while he served his life sentence for Leslie's murder.
People changed after I was found guilty. I wasn't Stefan or Mr. Kishko. I was just treated like rubbish. I was given a number, 688837. I'll never forget that. Everyone's attitude towards me changed. I became evil. They wanted to hurt me, and the guards didn't care. And it was also almost as bad for my mother outside, where everyone believed her son was a murderer. I wrote to her every week to tell her not to worry about me, and she would write back. I loved getting letters from people. One person who wrote to me was my friend Brenda, who I worked with at the tax office, Mrs. Brenda Lord. Brenda wasn't like other people. She knew that I couldn't have done the stuff they said I did. Brenda knew me, and she was kind to my mother. When other people had turned their backs on her after I was sent to prison, I wrote to Brenda because Mum said how understanding she had been about everything. Dear Brenda, I hope you had a nice Christmas. My mother spent hers crying her heart out, and of course I spent mine here in prison. Yes, my mother and I have not had such a nice time in the past with one thing or another. As soon as things were looking better, something had to come along and mess it up again. I was looking forward to the office party on Monday when the police came on the Sunday morning, December 21st, and here I am in Her Majesty's prison for a crime which I have not committed. I am missing my mother very much, and Mum is missing me too. The only thing I am wishing for at the moment is to be reunited with my dear Mum. With it being the first Christmas and New Year in our new home, Mother and I were really looking forward to spending it together. I wrote to Brenda a lot. I told her how I really felt. Sometimes things I couldn't say to Mum because it would upset her. Like when I told her about my time in hospital. The doctors said there was no hope for me coming out of the hospital alive. But I made it. How I regret to this day that it did not come true. Possibly the police would then have got the right murderer. I really would not mind being back at work either. But what can you do but wait patiently for the time when I can go home? I shall be celebrating my 24th birthday on March the 24th, here in the company of HMP Armley. Love, Stefan. Writing to Brenda helped me a lot. But I could never upset Mum by telling her all the things I was worried about. Or all the things that people had said. Or what happened to me in prison.
Everything that Stefan did was analysed. They looked at what he wrote. They looked at his spelling and his grammar and declared that Stefan was in no way intellectually deficient. as if that would explain him murdering a little girl or something. One thing I know though was that Stefan's letters to me or to his friend Mrs. Lord, Brenda, always stated as true, with an unswerving faith in the British justice system. Stefan believed from day one that justice would prevail and would secure his freedom. I had thought that once. After all, I had fled injustice and oppression in my homeland, and people in England were kind and fair. But that belief, my faith in the system, was shattered by what happened to my only son. And I began to be reminded of the dark days before I came to this country, and although I couldn't tell Stefan, I could not agree. I could not agree with him. This would soon all be over.
Mum tried to make me feel better, and sometimes she would tease me. When she came and saw I'd put on a bit of weight, she said I looked like Cyril Smith. I was nothing like Cyril. I was a bit bigger, and others in prison made fun of how I looked, but I wasn't like Cyril. I know she was just teasing me to keep my spirits up though. I tried to make sure that my mother wouldn't worry too much either. I told her that I still believed in the system of justice, but I was beginning to doubt it. Here is another letter I wrote to my friend Brenda. This one's a bit long, so you might want to get comfy. Dear Brenda, what can I say after I've put my faith in the British justice? Well, all I can say is it stinks to high heaven at this stage anyway. I am very sorry for my dear mother and all my friends and workmates. This has cast a black shadow over everyone. I was really amazed by some of the articles in the Rochdale Observer, particularly the one by Alan Tweedo called Kisco the Loner. It hurt me to think that after so many years of my dad being dead, it was really necessary to bring something about him into the article. Now I am so wrongly convicted the guilty man. I am sorry to say I am not allowed any gifts. It is no use sending me any money because I am unable to touch that as well. So all the condemned man can really say is thank you very much for your letter. I would like to ask you a favour, and that is if you would be so kind as to visit my mum occasionally, so that she is not entirely forgotten and without anyone for company. I know that it's not been easy to grasp as to why a man would go. Why a man in his right mind would sign a confession statement to a murder? But after being as ill as how I was a few months ago, and the way the police have been going at me, you see, the public get the wrong image of the police. They watch a TV programme like Doc Green. I think anyone who was so ill and still not 100% up to the mark would more or less have signed his execution warrant if need be. As funny as it seems, I thought that after that, I had a good chance of getting home to Mum. But you see, if you walk out of hospital, away from the deathbed, which I was lying in last year, something had to come along and spoil Christmas and New Year for us, in our new home. But that didn't mean as much as spoiling two people's happinesses after what we had been through. The police officers involved in the fiasco were able to down their pints, pulling the wool over the public's eyes that the right person was behind. And God knows when or who will be next. I am sorry to have gone on a bit too much, but I'm just trying to set out a clearer picture of this bungle of British justice. Love, Stefan. Kiss.
I hated that place, but I had to go. What mother wouldn't try to see her son? When he was on remand, awaiting trial, I made 57 visits, nearly 9 visits a month. But now that he had been found guilty, they would only allow me 2 visits a month. I was feeling sick. I had developed a lung disease, but nothing would stop me from visiting my beautiful boy. As long as I could walk to the bus stop, I would set off to visit him at his new home in the prison. I wanted to talk to Stefan's solicitor, but he would not hear of it. He was convinced that Stefan was guilty, and I had to speak to Mr. Smith, our MP. But even he seemed to be believing that there was too much evidence against Stefan proving his guilt. It looked very bad for us. So little hope. And as my health got worse, I hid it from Stefan. I tried only to lift his spirits with my letters and my visits. Eventually, I discovered that Stefan was doing the same, and it was only in his letters to Mrs. Lord that he would open up about how he was really coping. I gained some support from an unlikely source, the Rochdale Probation Service, who appointed a lady named Maggie Buckley. That poor woman had to put up with all my anger and my frustration and some of the worst words I had learned in the cotton mills. She was a strong support, but it could not last forever, and in time, we all moved on.
My mother could never know what was happening to me in prison. When I arrived on the wing, they started to spread rumours and called me a nonce. 5 prisoners attacked me and beat me up. I had to see the medical officer for a checkup and to get the cuts and bruises clean. It was the welcome to H&P Wakefield. It wasn't the last attack. The next one was worse. I got hit over the head and they said the attack was brutal. I had to go to Pinderfields Hospital for stitches in the back of my head. Brenda and her husband, Donald, contacted my probation officer because they said they were worried about my mum, and he went to see her. She became hysterical. Not that anyone wanted to tell me that. Mr. Schofield thought that there was something very wrong with her, and he said that she needed to face up to the reality that I was guilty and had been given a life sentence. But I think he was upset that he couldn't help, and he contacted my solicitor, who refused to help. He said that I was happy to plead diminished responsibility, and now I was changing my story by saying I was innocent. In the end, Mr. Schofield decided to help my mother write to the Registrar of Criminal Appeals.
Dear Sir, I am the mother of Stefan Kishko, and I have certain information below which I would like communicated to my son's barrister. 1. Confessions. Stefan made a confession to the police. This confession was made, I believe, under undue pressure at a time when my son was not fully aware of what he was doing. He has stated to me consistently that his confession was a lie and that it was only made under extreme provocation by the police. 2. Evidence was given regarding a prowler around Kings Bay Youth Club, who was identified in court as Stefan. Mrs. Joan Chadwick of 16 Lomond Terrace, Turf Hill, gave evidence to the solicitor that she saw and spoke to the prowler on that date, and that the man was definitely not Stefan. 3. I have heard from Mrs. Bidney of 9 Mary Street, Rochdale, the mother of a police officer, that her son, who saw Stefan in the police station, said that Stefan was in no condition to know what he was saying when he made his confessions. No one has been able to positively identify Stefan as being in the company of the murdered girl. 4. Alibi. On October 5th, 1975, Stefan and myself visited his aunts. The three of us went to the cemetery where his father and grandmother were buried. On the way, he mentioned the need to replace a car tire. This was replaced and the receipt was sent to the solicitor. On the way back, we called into a Continental store on Tweedale Street, owned by Mrs. Barron, who is able to recall the day, Sunday. She offered to act as a witness, but was not called. It was claimed that this was a last-minute alibi, but the solicitor was informed in plenty of time for the trial. 5. On the night of November 5th, 1975, when he was alleged to have exposed himself, he was actually at home, then 31 Crawford Street, in the company of myself, Mrs. Ferringstock of 267 Ashfield Road, and two neighbours of his aunt. On the second occasion, when he was alleged to have exposed himself to the same witness, he was actually at work in his office on the 5th floor and was seen by Mr. Oldham, who worked in the same building. 6. The police found a car number written on a paper in his possession, and at the time of his trial he couldn't remember why he had it, but since he has remembered that he jotted it down when the car in question was blocking his car near his office, and he argued with the owner about it. This happened in late 1973, and no doubt the owner of the car at the time could be traced. My letter was sent, and I hoped that it would be enough to make someone realize that there must be an appeal. But I had nothing. And Stefan's mental state got worse and worse. He began to uncontrollably soil himself, and they put him on tranquilizers to calm his anxiety and keep him quiet. Nearly 2 years had passed, and his letters to Mrs. Lord continued as he grew angry at the police and at the system that was punishing him in such a way. I became increasingly angry in my fight for justice, and Maggie Buckley once again receives the worst of it from me. I continued to make my 8-hour trip to Wakefield Prison.
Do you know what a dirty protest is? Do you? That's what I did. What other means did I have to vent my anger and my frustration? The guards were furious with me, and everyone called me filthy, dirty little bastard. I refused to clean my clothes or myself. I knew it wouldn't achieve anything, but what else could I do? The bloody police weren't getting questioned about what they did wrong. I was fed up, perplexed, you name it. I couldn't get a response from my solicitor, and no one believed me. It was nearly 2 whole years before I got the chance to have an appeal. And the lawyers were rubbish. I think they were happy to see me being punished whenever I was, and wanted me to suffer because they thought I was guilty of killing that little girl. And you know what? Fuck them. I don't like swearing, but they have driven me to it. This is just wrong. It's so bloody wrong. My lawyers ruined it for me again. All because of that bloody defence of diminished whatever. They said I was mad or mentally ill or a ballast, and that was why I killed her. The Court of Appeal rejected my appeal and all the evidence we had. I think that my lawyers were in on it too. It was a conspiracy against me. Everyone is ganging up on me because I'm an easy target and I don't stick up for myself and I'm confused. Well, fuck everyone!
Nobody would listen to us. We had lots of evidence. We had lots of witnesses ready to tell them that Stefan had not done it. But they would not allow me to speak or to put our case forward as part of the appeal. Stefan changed. He became bitter and resentful, and he began to see conspiracies against him everywhere. Nobody had ever seen that side of my boy. I don't think it had ever existed before. So bitter and resentful towards people. They broke him in prison. He only found out that he had lost the appeal on the radio. A prison officer had to ring to have the decision confirmed. The solicitor, Mr. Albert Wright, washed his hands of the matter. He thought Stefan would kill that little girl. They never even wrote to explain as the prospect of release was pulled from under him. All hope passed. Sometimes I think that it was only me, his Auntie Frieda and Stefan, who believed he was innocent. And just as there was a change in Stefan, there was a change in me too. I began to let my anger and frustration show, and I was accused of being hysterical. I took to drink. I'm not proud of that. But wouldn't you? When you know that your child is innocent, and yet he is locked up, and you can see that the punishment is killing him, no mother would be any different. I was told that the appeal could only be allowed in the House of Lords on a point of law. Well, I ask you, what is the point of having a law when my son is not allowed to prove his innocence? My son, my poor son, began to throw off wild accusations that I'm sure he never believed. But the drugs and the worry changed him. He wrote letters saying that people he knew or worked with had been likely involved. Everyone could see he was getting worse. Psychiatrists said he was suffering from creeping paranoia. I even thought about writing to the European Court of Human Rights to take up his case. I was willing to try anything. And in 1978, there was an organization called Justice began to take an interest in the case. Justice. Something was rotten, and the whole world needed to take notice of what was going on. But it was slow, so slow. It would be years before anything would really happen. Instead, I continued to work for Stefan's release, contacting anyone I thought might be able to help. And each year, on Stefan's birthday, I would plant a new tree in our garden to mark my belief in Stefan's innocence. I watched as saplings grew into mighty trees. I had no idea if I was planting a tree or a forest, as the world turned a deaf ear to my pleas. Years passed, and my gentle son became so damaged, so broken. The boy who would never raise a hand in anger became unrecognizable to me in many ways. In 1983, Stefan retaliated to an attack in prison and was found grasping a pair of scissors and threatening a man who had attacked him as he had him pinned down. That was not my boy. That was the justice system turned him into.
In 1984, I was sent to Bristol prison. There were worries about my behaviour. Even my social worker was scared of me. A psychiatrist said I had been suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. She said I should be transferred to Broadmoor, where they could help me, but they didn't. I went back to Wakefield, but they decided there was nothing wrong with me mentally. Couldn't they see? Couldn't they tell that prison had done for me? They didn't reconsider until 1987, 3 years later. Then I was transferred to a special prison in Aylesbury. I stayed there until 1989, and I was sent back to Wakefield. Nobody knew how to sort me out. When I got back to Wakefield, that was when the ghost appeared and started trying to interfere with me, sexually. I told the officers, but no one believed me. I had to keep hitting back against the ghost and lashing out to make him leave me. I began to think about asking Mrs. Thatcher to stick up for me. And if that wouldn't work, getting the boys from the IRA to do something. I even thought about getting the men from Mars to sort you all out. Can't you see what you're doing to me? It's not right, it's not right. I'm an innocent civil servant. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it.
We thought nobody was paying any attention to our case. I believed I was alone in my fight. I had no idea that behind the scenes doubts had been raised about Stefan's guilt and about his false confession. It was nothing I had heard about during all this time. The only other legal matter I knew about concerned my case against my former employers for the injury caused by their negligence affecting my lungs and breathing. I was sponsored by the textile union, or else I could never have afforded to take the case to court. I won £40,000 for my injury. £40,000 that I could use to prove Stefan's innocence. It allowed me to engage a new solicitor who might believe me. And that is precisely what I did. The new lawyers were wonderful. They engaged a private investigator and re-examined all the evidence presented against Stefan at the time of his arrest and trial. They traced witnesses that the original team never bothered to. They found a barrister and wrote to inform the authorities that they would be taking action on behalf of Stefan because they were building a very convincing case to prove his innocence. The authorities tried to put them off, but they fought like dogs to hurry the decision on a fresh appeal. This was what should have happened at the original trial, Never mind the first appeal. In 1990, we finally received this notice. The powers afforded to the Home Secretary by Section 17 of the Criminal Appeals Act 1968 impose a duty on him to consider claims that a miscarriage of justice may have occurred. It was the best news we had hoped for. Finally, they were prepared to look again at Stefan's case. A new team of lawyers and police officers were called upon to re-examine the investigation into Stefan's case, and this time they were going to do it properly, taking nothing for granted and looking at everything afresh. With new possibilities following the discovery of how to test for DNA, our hopes were high.
They wanted a fresh blood sample to test for DNA. They said that there was every chance that if it matched the DNA on the sample found on the little girl, it would prove beyond doubt that I was the murderer. But I had one thing on my side. I didn't have a problem giving blood because I knew I never did it. It couldn't prove me guilty because I wasn't. For years, I felt the police were all against me. Suddenly, I felt they were finally investigating to find out the truth, the real truth. If they can prove it wasn't me, I can go home. They were also concerned with my problem that I had to go to hospital for. Why they were trying to bring me on, they call it hypergonadism. And they say that it means that I can't produce sperm cells. So if the semen they found on the little girl contained any of the sperm heads, then the killer couldn't be me. They needed to test everything and to question everyone to find out if the treatment I was receiving would mean I could have produced sperm heads. At the time, I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you everything because I don't understand it. But it was true. I couldn't produce sperm heads. And it turns out they could have told that to the jury at my original trial, but they didn't. The jury would have thought very differently if they had did. The new evidence got better and better. They proved I didn't indecently expose myself, and the girls that had said that I had did had lied, and they could prove I wasn't the person who wanked over the girl because the scientists could see that clearly. Other witnesses who hadn't been called said they saw Leslie in a white car, not in mine. The evidence was getting stronger. They found the man whose car number I had written down, and he remembered that he used the part where I said he did. If the jury knew all this at the time, they wouldn't have believed I did it. They would have believed me when I said I had lied in that confession. It wasn't the jury's fault, but they should have been told. The detectives and the lawyers didn't want them to know, or they would have believed me when I said I had lied in my confession. They didn't want the jury to ask questions of any of it. They wanted to paint me as a weird murderer, and I never did it. My lawyers were told that the new police team had real doubts about the original police investigation.
My lawyer came straight to my house upon hearing the news, but he wasn't expecting to hear what was happening. Someone was with me explaining that Stefan had been transferred from Wakefield to Ashford Psychiatric Hospital as his mental health was rapidly getting worse. But Mr. Malone felt that To hear his news would bring me joy against the blackness of Stefan's condition. The new investigation by Detective Superintendent Trevor Wilkinson helped to prove that Stefan could not have been Leslie Moseed's killer, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And I will be forever grateful for his determination to see justice served. Stefan was by this time a very ill boy, and he could not attend his appeal, but he was released to a hospital in Prestwich, and that would allow him to be just 10 miles away from me, as his case went to the official appeal. His appeal was not allowed on the basis of doubtful evidence or a point of law. His appeal was allowed because of one fact. Stefan Kisko was innocent. He had spent 16 years in prison for a crime it was impossible for him to have committed, and the appeal cleared him of any guilt whatsoever. Once Stefan was well, he was free to return home with me here in Rochdale.
For me, the day of my appeal was just another day in hospital. But when the news came through, a great weight was lifted from me, and I started to make slow progress with my mental health. I was allowed to see my mum, and I spoke to the people of the TV for the news. 12 weeks later, I was allowed to go home on a weekend visit, and for the first time in 16 years, I slept in my own bed. My room was exactly as I left it, and my car was still in the garage. In time, I was able to move home and could take my mother out to garden centres and such like. But people recognised me and kept coming up and shaking my hand and wishing me well. I was a bit overwhelmed by all the attention, to be honest. I couldn't cope with too much fuss. I just liked to be home in my armchair, sitting by the fire, just sitting quietly and only speaking when I was spoken to. It was hard. It was very hard for me and my mother because she still wasn't well.
It was my dream to be reunited with my one and only son, and for everyone to know he was wholly innocent. I loved to see him in his chair, but I worried about him because he didn't seem present as he sat silently, with his mind somewhere else completely. He would never be truly well again, not completely. At Christmas 1993, Stefan rose from his chair and went up to bed. I heard a noise. I went to find him, slumped on the floor. His body was rigid. His face was pale. His lungs had stopped breathing. And his heart had stopped beating. On the 21st of December, 1993, I lost my beautiful boy. And I was never able to say goodbye to him that night properly either. He had been robbed of his life by the criminal justice system, and the real killer of Leslie Moseed was still free and unknown. It was so wrong.
I was buried on the 5th of January 1994 at Holy Trinity Church, Rochdale. The impact of my death on my mother was a crushing blow, and she lost the will to live. She'd been so strong and fought for so long. In April 1994, Charlotte Kishko died of a broken heart at the age of 70, though she seemed much older after the hand life had dealt this wonderful woman. No charges were ever brought to any of the police officers for what they did to me. My first lawyer went on to have a highly successful career. Trevor Wilkinson, the detective superintendent, reinvestigated my case and helped to free me. Trevor went on to play a part in bringing Leslie's real killer to justice. A chance arrest found the killer tested for DNA and matched to the DNA found on Leslie. At least this allowed some closure for her family. This play is a true story. It is dedicated to Stefan Kishko
And Charlotte Kisco.
and never forgetting Leslie Molseed. Good night.
Good night.